Welcome back. Today we are continuing on this joyous journey of obtaining excellent marks the end of the year for paper 2, and we are going to discuss the fur coat. As always, we are discussing a short summary first. The story has only two main characters, Paddy and Molly Maguire, and they are both Irish. Molly has been a housewife her whole life. She has raised their children on her own, while Paddy was in and out of prison because of his activities with the Irish Republican Army, or IRA. That is an initialism, by the way. What did the IRA do? In about the 1960s, they fought for the independence of Ireland from Great Britain. So we can sort of compare them to the ANC before apartheid ended. So before marrying Paddy, Molly used to work in her father's shop. And this fact is mentioned to us because we have to realize that she knows the value of money. The fact that she wants a fur coat is not just a whim. It's not that she does not realize how expensive it is. She realizes it very well. Molly is a plain woman. She's been a housewife all her life, so she hasn't had time to dress. She just had to make do. Her husband was in prison. She didn't have money. So she now does not have time to dress like the other loose women that Paddy refers to in their discussion. Molly is in the story mending a pile of clothes, which also shows us that they do not have a lot of money. She cannot just go out and buy new clothes. She has to mend them. Molly is also a woman who is filled with despair, which of course contributes to her inner conflict. Deep down, she wishes they were well off, and the author brings in a bit of humor here when he says that she supposes that they will have invented plastic pajamas by the time that she's dead, so that nobody has to mend it and you wouldn't even have to wash it, you can just wipe it with a cloth. So Molly is hoping for an easier life. The story starts soon after Paddy has been promoted to the position of secretary to the Minister for Roads and Railways, and he says they are soon to be rich. Molly wants a fur coat, which, as I said, causes the conflict that she experiences in her mind and in her heart. But the moment she asks for the fur coat, Paddy agrees to her getting one. So Molly struggles to make a decision. Should I get the fur coat? Should I not get the fur coat? However much she wants one, she knows it is expensive. Obviously, she gives reasons to Paddy why she needs a fur coat. She says that she doesn't have enough fancy clothes to put on whenever they are going to be invited to an event or party because of his new position, and a fur coat she can just put on over cheap plain clothes and nobody will be any the wiser. She will look fancy. And then, after all the arguing with Paddy about the fur coat, she ends up deciding she doesn't really want one. Always, after you've read a poem, a short story, a drama, a novel, you have to determine what is the relevance of the title. Why did the writer decide to call this story by this title? Now, obviously, to Molly, a fur coat will enable her to what she calls dress. But actually, a fur coat represents to her success. It means that she doesn't have to struggle anymore. And it is a symbol of class. They have moved up in society now, so they are going to mingle with important people. Paddy, being the practical man that he is, he says a fur coat will keep Molly warm and prevent her from getting a cold. And of course, that is when Molly gets a little bit upset with Paddy because he doesn't realize why she actually wants it. I'm not quite sure that Molly has made it out for herself either. Why does she actually want this fur coat? She gives her reasons, but at the end, when she tells Paddy, I don't know why I can't buy it, perhaps she hasn't cleared it out for herself either. The narrator is obviously the point of view from which the story is told. In this story, it is a third-person omniscient narrator, which means that the narrator is an outsider and not a character in the story. And we have clear insight into these characters and their thoughts and how their minds work, because the omniscient narrator relates the thoughts of these characters to us, but still leaves the final interpretation to the reader. Here you have the plot diagram. Obviously, that is an American spelling. We don't spell it like that, diagram, but it is also what we call the Freytag's pyramid, and this is how any story is told. That is the line of tension that any plot follows. We have the exposition, which is the introduction. Characters are introduced to us. The setting is introduced to us. We know where the story takes place. We know who is in the story. Then we have the rising action or the conflict, where the characters face a series of conflicts. Now, in a short story, there cannot be too many conflicts because of the scope of the piece of writing. It is shorter than a drama or a novel, so usually there's only one conflict. When we reach the climax of the story, it's the point of no return. The character makes a decision, something happens which alters their lives irrevocably. Then we have the falling action. The falling action cannot be as long as the rising action, otherwise the writer is going to lose the reader's attention. So the events leading to the end of the story must be much shorter than up to now, so that we can reach the resolution or the end of the story. It's also called the denouement, which is the French word for the resolution or the ending. So let's discuss how this story is told. First, we have the setting. Now, traditionally, the setting is part of the exposition. But if you have the Mind the Gap study guide that the Department of Education provided to matric learners, you will see that they separate the setting from the exposition. The setting of this story is somewhere in Ireland, inside Paddy and Molly Maguire's house. They mention the city of Limerick, which is where Molly grew up. They talk about Molly's sing-song Limerick accent. Then they also mention the county of Kerry. Paddy is working on the plans of a pier somewhere in Kerry. There you see where Limerick is, and there you see where Kerry is, and why Kerry would have a pier somewhere, because it has a coastline. The exposition. We meet Paddy and Molly. We hear that they are poor. We hear that Molly had to look after the children single-handedly, as Paddy was often imprisoned due to his involvement in the IRA. And the story starts off just after Paddy has received his promotion. The rising action. Molly wants a fur coat. She starts the story off by saying, "Paddy, I simply must have a fur coat." And then she's defensive about her reasons for wanting a fur coat. Remember, rising action. The conflict has to escalate so that we can eventually reach the climax. Paddy considers the practicalities because he's a practical man, and he does not understand why the fur coat is such an issue. The climax is where Molly accuses Paddy of being mean. And obviously, Paddy is upset about this. Now, mean has two meanings in this story. It's either literally he is being mean to her because he doesn't understand why the fur coat is so important to her, or it could mean stingy. He doesn't want to spend so much money on buying a fur coat. Molly's desire for this fur coat then causes the friction between her and Paddy. She runs to her room and she cries. The falling action, very short. Molly is given a check by Paddy. One morning she sits at her dresser and she finds the check. The resolution, she destroys the check. She goes to Paddy and she apologizes wholeheartedly to him for having been so mean. Paddy asks her, why does she not want to buy the coat? And she says, I don't know. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, Why does she not want to buy the fur coat? Characterization. They have asked in an exam paper before to compare the characters of Paddy and Molly and to mention 2 points for each one. So, Molly Maguire is selfish. All she can think of is the fur coat. And she makes Paddy feel guilty when she calls him mean and accused him of having the mean streak like all the Irish. She is insecure because she's worried about not looking as good as the wealthy women who will be at all these events that they are going to be invited to now. She is ungrateful. She dwells on her difficult life in the past, and this shapes her thinking and causes her inner conflict. She knows how she has struggled financially up to now, so how can she justify buying a fur coat when she has struggled so much to keep the family alive, to keep them fed and clothed? She is a proud and a stubborn woman. She doesn't really need a fur coat, but she thinks it is a symbol of status. And she is naive. Now, you have to decide whether you agree with any of these points or not. I don't think that she is completely selfish. I think the inner conflict of having moved up into a different social class and the desire not to look badly compared to the other wealthy women who will be at these events shape her thinking. And perhaps it is more a matter of insecurity than it is a matter of selfishness. But if you think that she's selfish and you can motivate it as well as it is motivated there, then you mention it. Paddy Maguire is a loving, supportive, and generous husband. He immediately agrees to Molly buying a fur coat. He's a calm, cool person. Even when Molly is mean, he stays cool and calm. He never shouts at her. He's a practical person. He looks at situations objectively. That is why he can stand and address the room, address the armchair, and have this debate about how logical it is to buy a fur coat or not. He is also patriotic because he joined the IRA to free his country from Great Britain. Themes. What is a theme? After you have read a story and you ask yourself, what has the writer tried to tell me? What message is the writer trying to leave with me? Then that answer will usually be the theme of the story. So obviously, because writing is complex, characters who are written well represent life, real life people, and people are complicated. So the chances of there only being one theme are slim. So we have to look at all the possible themes that there can be. Your Mind the Gap study guide does not cover all the themes, but if you learn the themes that are in your study guide, then you are well on your way to being able to answer any other theme question that has been asked. I have incorporated other themes into this PowerPoint that have been asked before, so you have the answers to those as well. So the first theme is the theme of desire. Molly strongly desires a fur coat. She believes she will be properly dressed when she owns a fur coat, and it will also afford her the lifestyle of success. The second theme is the theme of social class or wealth. Molly struggled when Paddy was in prison. She was poor, obviously had a low position in society, having a husband in prison, having no money to buy a lot of things. Now the situation changes when Paddy is appointed as the parliamentary secretary to the Minister for Roads and Railways, and now Molly finds it difficult to adjust to their new status. She feels insecure about being in the company of wealthy women with beautiful clothes. When she goes to these official events to which they will be invited, will they look down at her in her clothes? So perhaps in her mind, a fur coat will impress other women and she will feel as if she fits in. The theme of love and generosity. Paddy loves Molly, and the moment she asks him for the fur coat, he says, yes, go to Switzer's tomorrow and come back with one on your back. His generosity is, of course, shown by this. The theme of appearance. Molly, who is an ordinary housewife, is unlike the wives of De Valera and General Mulcahy, who have probably been in a higher social class for very much longer. And she believes a fur coat or even a set of new dresses will change her for the better. And then in her mind, she will be just as good as the wives of De Valera and General Mulcahy. So she compares herself to these women. To her, her appearance is important because then she will see herself on an equal social standing as these women. And then when she mixes in these new circles, she wants to look good because women judge each other, people judge each other. One of the question papers in the past asked about the theme of selfishness. Now, if you have learned the previous 4 themes and you know them well and you know your story, you will be able to answer this question, even though selfishness was not one of the headings under themes in your study guide. So what do we say? Molly wants Paddy to buy her a fur coat, yet she is indecisive. So she confuses Paddy with her selfishness. You can add to this theme if you look at the previous 4 themes. They also asked in another paper to discuss the theme of hardship or suffering. And then you say the Maguires have experienced a lot of tough times. Molly had to raise the children on her own, depending on government funds and family while Paddy was in jail. And Molly now struggles to come to terms with the idea. A third question paper asked to discuss the theme of insecurity. And as I say, if you know the previous themes, you can take any of those points, and if they apply to the theme of insecurity, you can add those points. You can virtually discuss any theme if you know your work and you understand the words in the papers. That's why it's so important that you work through old exam papers. So Molly feels insecure. By this time, you should really know this. Because of their new position in society, she feels wearing a fur coat would make her fit in at parties, but she cannot make up her mind about buying the fur coat. Paddy's insecurity, according to the memo in which this question appeared, stems from the work he has to do on the pier. He seems to be unable to come up with a viable solution. I'm not quite sure that the viable solution has so much to do with insecurity or indecision as with the fact that Molly called him mean and accused him of having the mean streak like the Irish. Because it's after the argument that he extends the pier and then he realizes, no, it cannot work. And then he takes away a few feet again. So his inner struggle has a lot to do with the argument that he's had with Molly. The style of writing. There is humor in the story, and the author also uses colloquial language. It is set in Ireland, so they use words that the Irish would typically use. Where is this? One example is where Paddy calls the other women that Molly compares herself to at these events as straps or jades, derogatory terms. Loose women. Now, they are not really loose women. It's just that Paddy feels they haven't done anything patriotic to free Ireland from Great Britain, and they haven't sacrificed like Molly has while he was fighting the good fight. Molly uses the word yera, which means that what he said is too unimportant to even consider. Paddy uses the word old, and the spelling here indicates how he would pronounce it. And then he also says if you have a scanner against wearing a fur coat. Diction and figures of speech. Remember, diction is word usage, and figures of speech, you know all the figures of speech that you will always get. The first one we're going to look at is simile. What is a simile? A simile is when they compare two things to each other. Each of these two things being compared will have one characteristic that is the same. If the writer says he is as slow as a tortoise, it doesn't mean that he is a tortoise. The writer is comparing the person's speed to the speed of the tortoise. So it's one characteristic being compared to another characteristic. So when you answer a simile, you have to tell the examiner what is being compared to what and why to get the 3 marks. So the first example we're going to look at, when Molly was angry with Paddy, she threw the children into bed that night as if she were throwing sacks of turf into the cellar. Why is this simile used? What does it mean? It shows us Molly's anger. She doesn't tuck the children into bed gently, but in a rough manner, as one would throw turf into a cellar. What is being compared to what? Her action of throwing the children into bed, figuratively putting the children into bed, is compared to the action of throwing sacks of turf into a cellar. So this shows us her anger. What is being compared to what and why? A second example we are going to look at, when Molly tells Paddy, like all the Irish, you have that peasant streak in you. She compares Paddy's apparently miserly tendencies, in her opinion, with the miserly tendencies that she believes the Irish have, because he is getting into this argument for or against buying a fur coat. Third example, when she apologizes to Paddy at the end, in the conclusion, in the denouement, she is crying like a kid. Now, Molly is not a child. What is being compared to what and why? The way that she is crying is compared to the way that a child is crying, with abandonment. So she is crying wholeheartedly. Metaphor. Remember, a metaphor is a shortened simile. Put in a simple way, for a metaphor, they left out the like or the as, and they use a direct comparison. For example, the years had polished her hard. The suffering or hardship that Molly has experienced all these years have made her a hard person, just like a diamond or a stone that is hard. Now, the reason why I use diamond in this answer is because just after this, they say her diamond bright eyes. Now, the brightness of her eyes are compared to the brightness of diamonds, but the comparison does not actually have anything to do with the shine in her eyes. They actually want to emphasize to the reader how the diamond and her eyes are equally hard because of the fact that the years had polished her hard. When Molly found the check that Paddy wrote out to her, her heart leaped inside her and then died in her. So for a moment, her heart leaped like a person or animal experiencing joy, leaping, but then it died when she realized that she will not eventually buy the fur coat. A last metaphor we are going to look at is where Molly accuses him of having the peasant streak in you. Obviously, you cannot have a streak, a literal streak in you. She accuses him of being the same as a poor farmer, a poor worker, somebody from the lower class who cannot afford a fur coat or who does not understand the value of a fur coat. Now, Paddy, I think, just does not understand why she wants a fur coat so badly. Personification. Paddy addressed the room when he's discussing the pros and cons of getting a fur coat. The room is not a person who can be addressed. So Paddy is actually talking to Molly, but he doesn't want to seem confrontational. In the same speech to Molly, he addressed the armchair. He cannot address an armchair since it's an inanimate object. He's pretending to talk about different people who will be at the parties or the functions or the events, and he doesn't want to seem confrontational, like we said in the previous example, while having a reasonable discussion with Molly. The same example we just had for a metaphor can also be personification when her heart leaped in her when she found the check. Her heart cannot leap like a joyous person does. Also, if her heart had died, she would also have died. So it is the hope in her heart that came to life for a while and then died when she decided not to buy the fur coat. Irony. They have asked all these examples of irony in previous exam papers. Molly accuses Paddy of being mean. stingy, miserly, yet he is quite willing to buy her a fur coat. It's ironic that she accuses him of being mean because he gives her the money. He tells her, "Come back with a coat on your back." Molly also accuses Paddy of having a peasant streak, yet she could be regarded as having a peasant streak. She cannot imagine herself wearing an expensive fur coat, and that's why she decides in the end she can use the money so much better. She's not going to buy the fur coat. Another example they had was, why is it ironic that Molly wants the fur coat? And in that extract, it was where she explained how she considered it vulgar. So the answer would have been, Molly desperately wants a fur coat, yet she considers it vulgar, which is ironic. Molly also says she doesn't care what other people say, but she keeps on pestering Paddy about the fur coat. So she does actually care about what other people say. She wants to appear good at these parties. The tone is the general character or attitude of a piece of writing, of a character at a specific moment in a short story, in a drama, in a novel, or it is the writer's or the poet's attitude towards his or her subject matter. In the fur coat, we have a tone of anger, dissatisfaction, spitefulness or maliciousness, and all these can be attributed to Molly. Molly's tone towards Paddy when she complains about him being mean, about having the peasant streak, is disgruntled, she's angry, she's dissatisfied, she's angry and dissatisfied with the difficult life that she has lived while Paddy was involved in the revolution. Obviously, if he hasn't seen her struggling every day, he would not fully understand what she had to go through. And perhaps there is a sense of resentment towards him in her heart that he does not appreciate what she had to go through while he was fighting for his country. Molly feels that other women have better lives, and that is why she mentions that they dress. And she doesn't have time to dress because she's still a housewife. She has to look after the house, she has to look after their children, she has to mend the clothes. All of those normal housewifely duties still have to be performed by her. So she is dissatisfied with the clothes that she has and her role as a housewife. But there is also a light-hearted tone. There are quite a few places where we smile reading the story. One of them is where Molly talks about a future with plastic pajamas that will not need to be mended and that will be cleaned with a cloth. The mood in a piece of writing, a poem, drama, is the feeling that is determined by the tone. And tone is determined by the diction of the writer, the word usage. So it can either be the state of mind of the character, or it can be the feeling that the reader has when reading. So whenever Molly is being angry or frustrated or malicious towards Paddy, there's going to be a mood of tenseness, or there's going to be a depressing mood when she is dissatisfied with mending the clothes and remembering the struggles that she had to go through while Paddy was in jail. But as I say, there's also a humorous mood when we smile reading the story. The last question in your paper will always be a level 5 question, and level 5 wants your opinion. So when you have to give your opinion, you can obviously agree with a statement or disagree with a statement. That is what discuss your view means. They give you a statement. Refer to the story as a whole. Do you think Molly's behavior is immature? Discuss your view. So discuss your view means, do you agree with that statement or do you disagree with the statement? If you agree, you are going to say yes. And then this is a 3-mark question, so you have to say at least 3 things for 3 marks. So you're going to say, Paddy agrees to give her the money, but she refuses it. She tears up the check. Molly spends a long time trying to convince Paddy that a fur coat will be practical, but Paddy has already agreed to her having it. Paddy tries to work on how to change the pier, but Molly persists with her nagging about the fur coat, and then Molly becomes angry when she thinks that Paddy is indifferent to her buying the fur coat, but she simultaneously becomes angry with him when he agrees with her. Or you can say, no, Molly is not immature, and then these could be your possible motivational points. You can say Molly asks permission to have the fur coat, but is not demanding in her request. She gives practical reasons why she needs the fur coat, but she is indecisive, which does not mean she is immature. It actually means she is mature because her experience of poverty and having to rely on relatives and the prisoner's dependence fund while spending money on a fur coat might seem extravagant in her eyes. Or buying a fur coat is expensive and needs careful consideration and discussion, but Paddy appears not to pay attention to the matter. Now, 3 marks, 3 points. Learners find it difficult to sometimes write 3 points for yes or 3 points for no. But if you can show the examiner, your marker in November, in September, that you can see this argument from both sides, you can say, yes, you agree she is immature and give a few motivational points. And then you say, on the other hand, I do not think that she's always immature. And then you mention a few points. That increases your chances of having 3 out of 3 when you can mention both points of the argument. Another example of a level 5 question that has been asked in a previous exam paper. Do you sympathize with Paddy Maguire in this extract? Discuss your views. You say yes. Paddy is trying everything to keep his wife happy. He is kind to her even when she is mean to him, and she only has hurtful accusations to him, and his wife has a desire for material things. So you sympathize with him because he is still poor. He's not rich yet. He has just been promoted. Or you can say, no, I don't sympathize with Paddy. He doesn't understand his wife's needs. He needs to be more appreciative of her because of the sacrifices that she made while he was in jail. The third level 5 question that was asked in a previous exam paper was, in the short story, The Fur Coat, Molly can be admired. Discuss your view. Now, this is exactly the same question as, do you think Molly is immature? You just look at the question from a slightly different angle, but it's basically the same answer. So you say, yes, she can be admired. Why? She reared her children on the prisoner's dependence fund and with family's assistance while Paddy was in prison. She is hardworking, she constantly is busy mending their clothes, and she doesn't say it, but inherently she feels that having a fur coat would be too costly. That's why she decides not to buy it in the end. Or you can say, no, she cannot be admired. She falsely accuses Paddy of being mean, and all he tries to do is to persuade her to get the coat. Or you can say she's inconsiderate. She keeps on interrupting him while he's trying to work on the plans of the pier in Kerry. Or you can say, no, she cannot be admired. Her indecision, her anger or frustration is discernible when she puts the children to bed, like throwing sacks of turf into a cellar. But remember, the art of being successful in paper 2 is knowing your short story. You can read your study guide as many times as you want. If you don't know the story, you are not going to be successful because they can ask you any extract from the story and you must apply what you've learned in your study guide to that specific extract. So if you don't know where in the story the extract fits, if you don't know what is happening around this extract, then you are not going to be answer the questions. So the first and most important thing is knowing your short story. You cannot even think of starting to learn your notes until you know your short story. Then you go to your study guide or your notes or the questions your teacher gave you. And then, after you've learned both of those, you will be able to answer any question they throw at you, and you will most probably be right.